when they come back, it feels bigger than it should. That is one of the hardest things to explain if you have never lived it. On the outside, maybe it is just a message, a reaction, a check-in, a soft little return after distance, silence, or no contact. But inside the body, it can feel like everything just changed. Like the whole story opened back up. Like hope got permission to breathe again. Like all the pain of the silence suddenly has a reason now. That is why returns are so powerful in avoidant and anxious dynamics. Not because every return means something big, but because the body wants it to mean something big. The anxious side does not experience a return as neutral contact. It often experiences it as emotional evidence. It feels like the bond still matters, like the person still feels it, like the silence was not the end. Like maybe this time, the story is finally turning towards something real. And when you are in that state, the return does not just feel nice. It feels like, finally. Finally something happened. Finally the waiting broke. Finally the pain has somewhere to go. Finally, maybe I was not wrong to hold on. That is the trap. Because a return can be real without meaning what you hope it means. A person can come back without coming back differently. A person can miss you without being ready. A person can reappear without bringing stability. And if you do not understand that distinction, you will keep turning contact into conclusions your nervous system wants more than your reality supports. If this kind of clarity helps your nervous system settle, subscribe. PsychBond is a daily decoder for psychology, relationships, and avoidant and anxious attachment patterns, so you stop guessing. What makes this so painful is that both sides of the dynamic are usually feeling something real. The avoidant person may really miss you. They may really feel your absence. They may really get pulled by the loss of connection, the loss of access, the loss of familiarity, the loss of emotional comfort. They may really think about you more than you know. And the anxious person may really feel the return in a deep body way. Relief, hope, reconnection. The feeling that maybe all the waiting, all the confusion, all the heartbreak was pointing to this moment. But real feeling is not always the same thing as real capacity. That is where so many people get trapped. They think the return proves something has changed. But very often, the return only proves that the bond is still alive enough to reactivate both people. It does not automatically prove that the structure is different. It does not prove that the person can now hold what they could not hold before. It does not prove that the return will survive contact with reality. So today, I want to talk about why a return feels like everything in these dynamics, and why that feeling can be so misleading. Because once you understand the difference between what a return activates and what it actually shows, you stop getting dragged as far by every comeback, every message, every reappearance, every little sign that seems loaded with meaning. Let us start with the anxious side, because this is where the emotional weight gets multiplied. Anxious attachment usually does not read a return in isolation. It reads the return against the pain that came before it, the silence, the distance, the withdrawal, the uncertainty, the wondering, the waiting, the humiliation of caring while pretending not to care, the way your body kept trying to make peace with not knowing. So when the person finally reappears, the return lands on top of all of that. It does not just say, "They are here." It says, maybe the pain meant something. Maybe the distance was not random. Maybe the silence was not the end. Maybe they needed time. Maybe they had to feel my absence. Maybe they finally get it now. That is why the return can feel so emotionally convincing. It plugs directly into the story the anxious body most wants to believe. Not just that the person is back, but that the return makes the whole pattern understandable. That it redeems the confusion. That it turns suffering into meaning. And once that happens, the mind starts building very quickly. They came back because they care. They came back because they miss me. They came back because they realized what they lost. They came back because the bond is different now. They came back because now they are ready. Notice how fast the return gets turned into a conclusion. That is hope thinking. Hope thinking is when the body is so relieved by contact that it starts writing the future before behavior has actually shown it. Hope thinking does not mean you are foolish. It means your nervous system is trying to turn uncertainty into safety as fast as possible. But that is exactly where the distortion happens, because the anxious body does not only want contact. It wants contact to settle the whole story. It wants the return to mean that the silence had a purpose. It wants the comeback to carry transformation. That is why one message can feel so big. It is not only contact, it is the possibility of emotional redemption. Now, let us talk about the avoidant side, because this is where the mismatch becomes painful. Avoidant people can absolutely come back from something real. They can miss you. They can feel the loss. They can get pulled by distance once there is enough space. They can reach out because the separation finally touches something deeper in them. They can be sincere in the moment they come back, but that does not always mean they have moved from feeling to structure. This is one of the hardest truths in avoidant dynamics. A return can come from longing, curiosity, loneliness, access hunger, emotional discomfort, guilt, nostalgia, fear of being forgotten, or fear of losing their place in your world. Any of those things can create a comeback. But not all of those things create readiness. Not all of those things create follow-through. Not all of those things create a relationship that can suddenly hold clarity, pace, and consistency. So, while the anxious side often experiences the return as evidence, the avoidant side may be experiencing it as a moment of feeling. Those are not the same thing. Feeling says, I miss this, I miss you, I want to reach out, I want to reconnect, I do not want the bond to disappear. Structure says, I can now stay, I can now be clear, I can now do this differently. I can now tolerate the emotional weight of what this means. Many returns happen before structure. That is what makes them so dangerous for the anxious side. Because the return feels so emotionally large that it gets mistaken for a real shift in capacity. But capacity is not proven by how strongly someone reappears. Capacity is proven by what they do after they return. That is the part many people skip because they are so relieved that the person came back at all. They stop evaluating the pattern and start protecting the return. They become extra soft, extra understanding, extra available, because they do not want to scare the moment away. They tell themselves not to ask too much, not to ruin the energy, not to move too fast, not to bring up the hard parts yet. That is how old loops restart under the disguise of hope. Let us make this even more direct. A return feels like everything because your body is tired. It is tired of uncertainty, tired of waiting, tired of not knowing, tired of trying to understand silence, tired of holding itself together while pretending to other people that it is fine. So when something finally happens, the body grabs it hard. It says, finally, finally movement, finally a sign, finally a reason not to let go. Finally, I do not have to sit inside total uncertainty for one more second. That is why even a small return can feel huge. The body is not only reacting to the actual message, it is reacting to the ending of suspended pain. That is important because sometimes what you are calling proof is really relief. Relief that the waiting is broken. Relief that the bond is not dead. Relief that you do not have to fully grieve right this second. Relief is powerful. But relief is not the same thing as evidence of change. This is one of the most important differences in anxious healing. If you keep confusing relief with proof, you will keep getting pulled back into patterns that feel emotionally convincing and structurally empty. Relief feels like something happened, but something happening is not always the same thing as something changing. Now let us talk about the way people usually think after a return. Hope thinking sounds like this. They came back, so this must mean the connection is stronger than the silence. They came back, so maybe they were processing. They came back, so maybe they needed space to realize things. They came back, so maybe they could not lose me after all. They came back, so maybe I should trust the feeling. They came back, so maybe I was right to keep believing in this. Hope thinking is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet and tender. Sometimes it just sounds like, maybe this is the beginning. Maybe this time I should stay open. Maybe I should not be too guarded. Maybe the return itself is the answer. Maybe the silence was leading here all along. Proof thinking sounds different. It says, okay, they are back. What do they actually do now? Do they acknowledge what happened? Do they stay consistent? Do they get clearer over time or foggier? Do they take responsibility or only restart contact? Do they build anything or do they only wake the bond back up? Proof thinking is not cold. It is reality-based. It does not deny the meaning of the return. It simply refuses to let the return mean more than behavior can hold. That is a huge difference. And for anxious people, it is one of the hardest emotional skills to learn. Because hope feels warmer than proof. Hope feels more romantic. Hope lets the body stay inside the fantasy that the comeback itself is the transformation. Proof makes you wait and watch. Proof asks whether the moment can survive time. Proof says, do not tell me what the return felt like. Show me what the return becomes. That is mature love. But it does not feel exciting at first. It feels slower. It feels less magical. It feels less like surrender and more like reality. That is why people often avoid it when they are still deeply attached. Hope offers immediate emotional reward. Proof asks for patience. Hope gives your body a story. Proof makes your body stay in uncertainty long enough to see what is real. That is harder, but it is what protects you. Now, let us go deeper into why a return feels so powerful in the anxious body. It often touches three things at once. First, attachment relief. The person is here again. The bond is not gone. The body can stop bracing for total loss, at least for a moment. Second, emotional redemption. The silence now seems to have a reason. The pain now seems like it may lead somewhere. The return helps the mind build a story where suffering was part of a bigger arc, not just suffering. Third, identity reassurance. If they came back, then I mattered. If they came back, then I was not crazy to feel the connection. If they came back, then I was not the only one. If they came back, then maybe I was seen more than I thought. These three things together create a very strong emotional high. That high gets mistaken for truth all the time. But a feeling being intense does not make it accurate. It only makes it intense. Now, let us be fair to avoidant people too, because this is not always cynical. Sometimes an avoidant person really does come back because something has shifted inside them. Sometimes distance really does make them feel the loss more clearly. Sometimes the absence removes pressure and lets feeling rise. Sometimes they do want to try again. Sometimes they are sincere. But sincerity is still not the only question. Sincerity matters, but capacity matters more. If they are sincere and still cannot stay, still cannot be clear, still cannot handle the emotional reality of reconnection, then the outcome for you is still confusion. This is why anxious people get so hurt by sincere avoidant returns. Because the feeling is real enough to open everything back up, but the structure is still too weak to protect the bond once it is open. That is what makes these dynamics devastating. It is not always that nobody cared. It is often that care and capacity were never the same thing. And if you do not understand that, you will keep using real feeling as proof of real readiness. That is not the same thing. Let us talk about what happens next, because this is where the truth usually shows itself. After the return, many anxious people stop evaluating and start investing. They feel the hope, they feel the relief, they feel the meaning, and then they move emotionally toward the person before the person has actually shown anything new. They become available again, warm again, hopeful again. They start building future inside themselves again. They start protecting the bond again. They start excusing what is still unclear because the return itself feels so important. And because the return felt so emotionally convincing, they often do not notice that they are treating contact like evidence before evidence has arrived. This is why returns can restart old loops so fast. Not because the first message was so deep, but because the person receiving it gave it depth before time had earned it. That is not blame. That is just the pattern. Now let us say something really plain. A return is not the same thing as a repair. A return is contact. Repair is what happens if the contact becomes honesty, accountability, steadiness, and changed behavior. A return is a door opening. Repair is what someone brings through the door. A return is possibility. Repair is structure. A return says the bond can still be reactivated. Repair says the bond can now be handled differently. Those are not the same. That distinction can save people months or years. Because so many anxious people are living in the emotional hangover of returns that never became repairs. The person came back, and that was enough to reopen the whole attachment system. But the deeper issues never changed. The same vagueness came back. The same inconsistency came back. The same fear of closeness came back. The same half-presence came back. The return was real, but it brought you right back to the same pattern. That is the heartbreak. Not that they came back. That they came back the same way. Let us also talk about what the return does to your standards. When a return feels like everything, your standards often drop without you noticing. Things you would have questioned before now feel good enough. A small message feels meaningful enough. A vague apology feels deep enough. a tiny effort feels promising enough. Why? Because the body is so relieved to have movement that it starts accepting less structure than it actually needs. This is another reason returns are so dangerous in anxious dynamics. They do not only wake up hope, they lower your threshold for what you call change. Suddenly, a small sign feels huge, not because it is huge, but because you were starving. And starving people are more likely to mistake a crumb for safety. That is not weakness, that is deprivation. But it is still important to see clearly, because if you do not, you will keep giving future meaning to present scraps. You will keep mistaking small emotional signals for actual relational movement, and those are not always the same thing. Now, let us make this practical. If someone returns, what should you actually look at, not just whether they came back? Look at whether they can hold contact without going vague again. Look at whether they name the past or glide over it. Look at whether they get more direct as things continue or whether they stay in emotional hints. Look at whether their effort grows or whether it peaks early and fades. Look at whether they can tolerate the reality of your needs now that they have reopened the bond. Look at whether you feel steadier over time or more activated over time. That last one matters a lot. Sometimes, a return feels amazing for a day and painful for the next month. That is information. The question is not only what the return felt like when it landed. The question is what it created in your nervous system after. Did it build stability or restart monitoring? Did it create clarity or just more meaning-making? Did it move toward relationship or just away from silence? There is a huge difference. Another important truth. Sometimes, what feels like proof is actually just the ending of uncertainty for a moment. And when uncertainty ends, even temporarily, the body floods with relief. That relief can feel like certainty. It can feel like truth. It can feel like, there it is, I knew it. But often, it is simply contrast. Pain was high, then contact came. Of course, the body reacts strongly, but a strong reaction is not a reliable translator. Strong reactions often tell you where your hope is, where your hunger is, where your fear is, where your wound is. They do not always tell you what is actually safe. This is why anxious healing has so much to do with not treating inner intensity like evidence. Inner intensity is important. It deserves compassion. It deserves attention. But it still needs reality. That is the whole move from hope thinking to proof thinking. Not becoming colder, becoming more anchored. Now let us talk about what proof thinking sounds like in a live moment. It sounds like, yes, this return matters to me, but I am not going to decide what it means before I see what they do next. It sounds like, yes, I feel relief, but relief is not the same thing as change. It sounds like, yes, I want this to mean something real, but I will let behavior reveal whether it does. It sounds like, yes, the comeback moved me, but I am still going to watch the pattern. That is a very different posture from anxious hope. It is softer on the outside sometimes, but stronger underneath. It does not rush toward fantasy. It makes room for reality to show itself. That is what protects your nervous system from getting dragged as far each time. And if you are the avoidant one listening, I want to say something here too. If you return because you miss someone, because you felt their absence, because silence brought up real feeling, that matters. But if you come back and then offer the same vagueness, the same instability, the same emotional half-presence, then your return is not neutral. It wakes someone up. It reopens the bond. It reactivates hope. So if you know that you are not ready to bring more than feeling, that matters too. Because feeling can be real and still not be enough. Missing someone is not the same thing as being able to love them well. That is the hard adult line in all of this. If you are the anxious one listening, this is where your healing becomes less about whether they came back and more about whether you can stay with yourself when they do. Can you let the return be emotionally real without instantly turning it into a future? Can you let yourself feel hope without bowing to it? Can you stay open without collapsing your standards? Can you let the person reveal whether the return is different this time instead of deciding it for them because you want it to be true? Those are hard questions. But those are the questions that stop the loop. Because what keeps people stuck is not only the return. It is what they let the return mean too early. So let me say it very plainly. A return can be real. A return can be emotional. A return can matter. A return can even come from love. And still, none of that automatically makes it safe. None of that automatically makes it sustainable. None of that automatically makes it different. The only thing that can show you whether this return is actually different is what happens after the return. Does the contact become clearer? Does the person become steadier? Does the bond become more honest? Does the structure get stronger? Or does the comeback only wake up the same old cycle in a new emotional moment? That is the question. Not did they come back, but what did the return become? If you can stay with that question, you protect yourself from one of the most painful distortions in anxious dynamics, which is treating a return like the answer, when really it is only the beginning of new information. And sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is let the return be just that. New information. Not a prophecy, not redemption, not closure, not proof that the story you wanted is finally the true one. Just information. Something to observe. Something to feel. Something to watch. Because when you stop forcing the return to carry the meaning your body is starving for, you finally give reality room to show you whether anything has actually changed. And that is what leads you out of hope thinking and into something much steadier. Not colder, not harder, just steadier. And in these dynamics, steadier is often the thing that saves you. Welcome to PsychBond. You're safe here.